A routine legal proceeding takes a sharp turn when a confident black woman steps up, only to be met with smirks and dismissive laughter from those who believe they've already won. But when the judge stands and delivers a shocking revelation, the entire courtroom is forced to reconsider everything they thought they knew. What happens next will leave you speechless. Let us know in the comment section below where you're watching from. The courtroom was alive with a quiet hum of conversation, the kind of murmuring that only came from a space filled with confident lawyers, impatient plaintiffs, and smug defense teams who believed they had already won before the trial had even begun. Maya Carter sat at the long table, her fingers interlocked, her expression unreadable. She had learned long ago that courtrooms weren't just places of law. They were arenas of power. And power, more often than not, was wielded by those who looked nothing like her. She could feel the stares before she even lifted her head. The opposing counsel, a group of older white men in their polished suits, sat back in their chairs, exchanging amused glances as they whispered to each other. One of them, Daniel Prescott, leaned over to his co-counsel, smirking as he whispered something that made the others chuckle. Maya knew exactly what they were thinking. She had seen it before, had heard the whispers, had felt the weight of dismissiveness long before anyone had spoken a word. She was the only black woman in the room. "Looks like they sent in a law student to take notes," one of them muttered under his breath, just loud enough for Maya to hear. She exhaled slowly through her nose, pressing her lips together in a tight smile. She wasn't new to this game. The doubt, the underestimation, the thinly veiled jokes at her expense. It was all part of a script that had been playing long before she ever stepped foot into a courtroom. Across the room, the judge entered, and everyone rose to their feet in unison. "The Honorable Judge Patterson presiding," the bailiff announced. Maya stood with the others, her back straight, her face calm. Judge Patterson, a middle-aged black man with sharp eyes and an air of authority, took his seat, adjusting his robes before nodding for everyone to be seated again. Daniel Prescott was the first to rise. "Your Honor, if I may," he began smoothly, already oozing confidence. "We're more than prepared to move forward with this case, though I do find it unusual that we haven't seen opposing counsel yet." He turned toward Maya then, feigning surprise. "Oh, not unless this young lady here is the representation." His smile was a careful blend of condescension and amusement. Laughter rippled through the defense's side of the room. Maya's jaw tightened, but she remained still. She wasn't about to react, not yet. Judge Patterson lifted an eyebrow, his gaze flickering between Prescott and Maya. "And what exactly do you find unusual about that, Mr. Prescott?" the judge asked, his voice calm but with an edge that made the smirks around the room fade slightly. Prescott cleared his throat. "Nothing, Your Honor. I just assumed—" "Be careful about what you assume," Judge Patterson cut in. "Miss Carter, are you ready to proceed?" Maya finally stood, smoothing out her blazer before meeting Prescott's gaze head-on. "Yes, Your Honor. Ready as ever." Her voice was steady, clear. The smirk on Prescott's face twitched, but he covered it quickly, sitting back down with an exaggerated sigh, as if he were indulging a child playing dress-up. Maya turned slightly, catching a glance at the plaintiff sitting behind her, the clients who had put their trust in her to represent them. She saw the way the young woman at the center, a mother fighting against an unjust eviction, clutched her hands together, worry written across her face. Maya had no room for doubt. Not here. Not today. Prescott leaned back in his chair, whispering again to his co-counsel. "This should be interesting," he murmured. "Can't wait to see her fumble." Maya didn't need to hear it to know what they were saying. It didn't matter. She had been underestimated before. She had been counted out before. And every single time, she had proved them wrong. Judge Patterson adjusted his glasses and glanced at his docket. "We'll begin with opening statement," he announced. "Mrs. Carter, the floor is yours." The shift in the room was almost tangible. Even the court reporter hesitated for a fraction of a second. as if expecting Judge Patterson to call on someone else. The moment stretched, thick with unspoken disbelief. Maya took her time, pushing her chair back with slow, deliberate movements. She stepped forward, standing tall, her heels clicking against the polished courtroom floor. And then, just as she was about to speak, Judge Patterson did something that made the entire courtroom fall silent. He stood. The murmurs died instantly. The defense attorney stiffened. Prescott's smirk faltered. Judge Patterson folded his hands in front of him, glancing around the room before settling his gaze directly on Prescott. "Before we proceed," he said, his voice calm but firm, "I want to make something very clear." The room held its breath. "You are in the presence of not only a qualified attorney but one of the best legal minds in this courtroom," Judge Patterson continued. "Ms. Carter is not an assistant. She is not a student. She is not here to take notes." Prescott swallowed, but Judge Patterson wasn't finished. "She is your opposing counsel," he said, letting the words settle like a slow, deliberate strike of a gavel, "and I strongly advise you to treat her as such." Silence. The weight of those words pressed down on the room, forcing a shift in posture, a recalibration of assumptions. Maya met Prescott's stunned expression with a slight tilt of her head, waiting. For the first time since the trial began, he looked uncertain. "Good." Maya finally spoke, her voice smooth, unwavering. "Thank you, Your Honor." Then, without missing a beat, she turned to the jury, her expression poised, and delivered her opening statement with a confidence that left no room for doubt. And this time, there was no laughter. The room was silent, stunned into submission by the weight of the judge's words. Maya sat frozen, feeling the firm grip of Judge Whitmore's hand on her shoulder. The touch was reassuring, solid, the first sign in this courtroom that someone of authority was standing with her instead of against her. But her heart still pounded in her chest, not from fear, but from years of being underestimated, dismissed, and ridiculed. Across from her, Daniel Prescott's smirk had all but vanished, his once relaxed shoulders now stiff with tension. His co-counsel, Robert Hayes, who had been snickering just moments ago, now shifted uncomfortably in his chair. The smugness in their eyes had been replaced by something else, something Maya had seen before. Unease. The judge's voice cut through the courtroom again, his words sharp and clear. "I expect every single person in this courtroom to show respect where it's due, and if I hear even a whisper of condescension toward opposing counsel again, I won't hesitate to hold someone in contempt." Maya finally allowed herself a small breath. Judge Whitmore removed his hand from her shoulder and returned to his seat, but the impact of his words lingered, hanging in the air like a thick cloud neither side could push through. "Yes. Carter," Judge Whitmore said, nodding toward her, "proceed with your case." Maya swallowed, slowly rising from her chair. The moment felt heavy, but she refused to let it weigh her down. She had a case to win. She turned to the jury, her heels clicking softly against the polished courtroom floor. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, keeping her voice steady. "Today you are going to hear a case about power and responsibility, about the people who have the ability to change lives, and the ones who choose to exploit that power instead." She let her eyes scan the jury, making sure each person felt seen. "You will hear testimony. You will see evidence. But more importantly, you will understand that this case isn't just about what happened. It's about what's right." This was said to Catherine Wett. She was killed on it during the protests of Union. People were killed, and the action was looked. Maya took a small step forward, then turned her gaze toward the opposing table. "My clients deserve justice," she continued, "and that is exactly what I intend to get them." She turned back toward the judge. "Your Honor, I call my first witness." The moment Maya sat back down, she caught the flicker of frustration in Daniel Prescott's face. He was rattled, but not broken. Not yet. The trial began in full, with witness after witness stepping up to tell their side of the story. Maya remained laser-focused, taking notes, listening carefully, waiting for the moment when Prescott would slip up. Because she knew he would. Men like him always did. When the defense's turn came, Prescott straightened his tie and strode toward the jury box with renewed confidence. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, the smirk returning to his lips, "I think we can all agree that while Ms. Carter here is—" he hesitated, glancing at her, "passionate. We must focus on facts, not feelings." Maya kept her face neutral. The jab didn't surprise her. If anything, she had been expecting it. She watched as Prescott paraded his own witnesses to the stand, each one carefully coached to paint a picture that suited his version of the truth. But Maya was patient. She knew when to strike. And her moment came sooner than she expected. A key witness, a landlord who had evicted her client under suspicious circumstances, took the stand, his tie slightly crooked, a bead of sweat forming at his temple. Maya stood, taking her time as she approached. "Mr. Reynolds," she began, flipping through her notes, "would you please remind the court why you evicted my client?" Reynolds cleared his throat. She was behind on rent." Maya nodded. "I see. And when exactly did you serve her the eviction notice?" Reynolds shifted slightly in his seat. "March 3rd. Maya glanced at the papers in front of her. "Are you sure?" "Yes." She turned slowly, walking toward the evidence table. "Because, according to the official records," she said, holding up a document, "the eviction notice wasn't issued until March 20th, 17 days later." The courtroom stirred. Prescott stiffened. Reynolds swallowed hard. I must have misremembered." Maya nodded, as if considering his words. "Misremembered," she repeated. "Yet this is a legal document, time-stamped and signed by you, confirming that the eviction was served on March 20th. So which is it, Mr. Reynolds?" The landlord fumbled for an answer, but there wasn't one. Maya turned toward the jury, letting the silence speak for itself. "Ladies and gentlemen, you now have to ask yourselves, if the defendant's witnesses can't keep their facts straight, what else are they hiding?" Prescott shot up from his seat. "Objection." "Overruled," Judge Whitmore said, barely looking up from his bench. Maya fought the urge to smile. The cracks in Prescott's defense were beginning to show. By the time the last witness testified, Maya could feel the shift in the air. The jury wasn't buying Prescott's arguments. His usual arrogance had started to slip away. And then, the moment she had been waiting for arrived. Prescott stood for his final cross-examination, his frustration evident in the way he adjusted his cuffs. "Miss Carter," he said, addressing her directly, "it's clear that you've done your homework, but let's be honest. Your client was behind on payments. Are we really supposed to ignore that just because you found a technicality?" Maya took a slow breath, keeping her expression even. "This isn't about a technicality," she said smoothly. "It's about the truth. And the truth is, my client was targeted unfairly. The facts prove it." Prescott opened his mouth, but no words came out, because he knew it, and so did everyone else in that courtroom. Maya turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I believe we've heard enough." Judge Whitmore nodded. Agreed. The trial was nearing its end, and Maya was ready for the final blow. The tension in the courtroom was thick, the kind of weight that pressed against the walls and settled into the bones of everyone inside. It was a feeling Maya Carter knew all too well. The moment before, justice was either served or snatched away. She sat at the plaintiff's table, her hands folded neatly over her legal pad, her breathing steady. Across from her, Daniel Prescott shuffled through his notes with a level of stiffness that betrayed his nerves. The smirk that had carried him through the trial was gone, replaced by something tight and uncertain. His co-counsel, Robert Hayes, sat beside him, his hands clasped together, his knuckles white. The jury had been given their instructions. The case was now out of the lawyer's hands. Maya exhaled slowly, glancing at her client. A single mother fighting against an illegal eviction that would have left her and her children on the street. The woman clutched her hands together, her face tense with hope and fear. Judge Richard Whitmore sat high on the bench, his stern blue eyes scanning the room. The same judge who had placed a reassuring hand on Maya's shoulder when she had been mocked. The same judge who had silenced the arrogance of the defense team with one firm statement. And now, it all came down to this. The bailiff stepped forward holding a folded piece of paper, the jury's decision. As the jury reached a verdict, Judge Whitmore asked, his voice calm but powerful. A middle-aged black woman in a navy blue dress, the jury foreperson, stood up, holding the paper tightly in her hands. "We have, Your Honor." Maya's heart pounded once, but she kept her expression composed. The foreperson handed the paper to the bailiff, who brought it to the judge. Silence stretched across the courtroom like a drawn-out breath. Judge Whitmore unfolded the verdict, his eyes scanning the words. His face remained unreadable. Then, with a firm nod, he handed it back to the bailiff. "Will the defendant please rise?" the bailiff instructed. Maya turned her head slightly, watching as Daniel Prescott and Robert Hayes rose to their feet, their backs straight, their expressions blank. The jury foreperson cleared her throat. "In the case of Carter v. Reynolds, regarding the unlawful eviction of Ms. Lisa Thompson and her family, we, the jury, find in favor of the plaintiff." Maya felt her entire body release the breath she had been holding. A stunned murmur filled the courtroom. A gavel strike cut through it. "Order," Judge Whitmore commanded. Then, nodding toward the jury, he said, "You may continue." The foreperson held her head high. "We further award the plaintiff restitution in the amount of $200,000 for damages and emotional distress." The noise that followed was immediate. A gasp from Maya's client, a low, disbelieving grunt from Prescott, an immediate turning of heads, whispers swirling through the courtroom like a storm. Prescott's mouth fell open slightly before he caught himself, his jaw tightening, his hands curled into fists, his nails digging into his palms. Maya, however, remained still, controlled. Her client was trembling beside her, her hands covering her mouth as tears welled in her eyes. Maya turned to face her fully, finally allowing herself a small, warm smile. "It's over," she whispered. "You won." Lisa Thompson let out a shuddering breath before pulling Maya into a tight hug. Maya stiffened at first, surprised, but then she relaxed, patting the woman's back as she let the victory sink in. On the other side of the courtroom, Prescott ran a hand down his face, his mind clearly scrambling for a way to salvage the situation. But there was nothing left to do. He had lost. Robert Hayes muttered something under his breath, his face twisted in frustration, but Maya didn't care enough to listen. Judge Whitmore adjusted his robe, his voice cutting through the courtroom once again. "The court finds the defendant guilty of unlawful eviction and discrimination. The judgment is final. This courtroom is adjourned." He struck his gavel one last time, and just like that, it was over. Maya sat back in her chair, a sense of exhaustion washing over her. The case had been long, the fight had been brutal, but justice had been served. As the courtroom emptied, Prescott finally turned toward Maya, his face a mixture of frustration and forced respect. "You got lucky," he muttered, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Maya arched a single brow, unimpressed. "That wasn't luck, that was skill." Prescott scoffed, shaking his head as he grabbed his briefcase and stormed off. Maya exhaled, finally allowing herself a real, genuine smile. She had done it. Not just for her client, but for every single black woman who had ever walked into a courtroom and been doubted before they even spoke. As she packed up her notes, she felt a presence beside her. Judge Whitmore stood there, his expression calm but approving. "You argued well, Miss Carter," he said simply. Maya met his gaze, her respect for him growing. "Thank you, Your Honor." He nodded once, then turned and walked away, his robe flowing behind him. Maya gathered her things, her head held high as she exited the courtroom. She had walked into that room underestimated. She had walked out undefeated. And next time, they wouldn't dare to doubt her again.